Yeah, and today with my guest is Mary Ann Thompson-Frenk, and you do so many things. I'm going to read a little bit about that, and I'm sure we're going to need more than just one session. But you are the president of the Memnosyne Institute, the John Philip Thompson Foundation. You're a next generation, of course, of the Thompson family, 7-Eleven. And you are an award-winning artist and a humanitarian that does a lot of work, and we'll speak about just a little bit in the time we have, but you do so much. I have to say, we met when we did our Texas conference, our Dallas conference, and you actually spoke at both Dallas and Houston. And you were kind enough to host a special dinner at your house that was amazing, and I met brilliant people. So let me just share a little bit about your life story and what you do today. So we'll touch different points, but maybe I'll start saying that you were adopted when you were 5 days old by the family that opened 7-Eleven. You rose through a challenging childhood with hearing loss, asthma, different things, and you grew and to do amazing things, which today includes you being a speaker at the White House, the United Nations, TEDx, and many, many more, the House of Lords, and the list goes on and on. I'm just jumping from one point to another because we have so much to talk about. And you were recognized by the Buckminster Fuller Institute as the first person to invent the architectural formula for the dome at different angles. We'll talk about that to create the human figure. You were a leader, and you told me about it when we met for lunch as well, in the negotiation between two tribes that's been there, I think, issues they had for 300 years, Navajo and Hopi tribes, which were amongst the first accomplishments of you as a humanitarian. You served as the co-founder and president of the Institute. Obviously, we mentioned that. International, the Memnosyne Institute is an international Texas-based nonprofit with chapters all around the place. Japan, I see here, Mexico, Israel, all around the place. The organization includes outreach and different initiatives like food source. I think you were also helpful with the masks during COVID. And we'll talk about all of that because it's just, I want to leave some time for us to talk. You're also a general partner at PTF Holdings, which is basically a planet profit modeled focused investment company with environmental social impact development arm, Echo, in collaboration with your partners. And that I believe much of what you do also has to do with the 7-Eleven story and how they fought the KKK and led you to do what you do today. Your articles have been published in many, many places. You won the statewide award for arts journalism for your article at Embrace magazine. I'm just trying to jump to different points because it goes on and on. You were contributing author by 3-time Nobel Prize nominee Dr. Irvin Laszlo in his New Consciousness, Quantum Resonance, and the Future of the World, where he identified you and your husband, Joshua Frank, whom I also had the pleasure of meeting. Lovely, lovely person, as the two of the 21st century visionary thinkers for the innovative social modality. Also, your work has been published in developing a global agenda, expert insight from the STEP Global Congress. You wrote the majority of the USA stories from Mira Rasula's book, 50 Inspiring Voices of Migrant Women. And as I've mentioned below, you're an award-winning artist, and I happened to see one of your pieces, which is huge, beautiful at your house. Wow, so many things. So maybe we'll start at the beginning. So how are you doing? You're in Dallas this morning?
Yes, I'm in Dallas. I guess that's the question both of us should ask each other quite often. Where are you located in the world right now?
That's right. That's right. So I'm in New York, as in the heart of the city, close to Wall Street today. And yeah, maybe we'll start with your, before we talk about all you do today, in being such a humanitarian, doing so many things in this area. Growing up, your amazing story. If you could share with us how that happened, how was it growing up in the family, your challenges.
Well, for me, everything, as I like to tell people, history is part of a braid. You have, the past, the future, and the present. And when you recognize that, you can see your part in weaving into that braid. None of us walk in on an empty stage. So that being said, yes, my grandparents fought the Ku Klux Klan in Dallas, and my grandfather also fought to make profit sharing legal in the United States. It may be difficult for a lot of younger people to realize this, but it used to be illegal. He was called a communist and socialist for advocating for profit sharing. So, I came in on the stage, if you will, of a family that was very proactive in making social change. And, they never lectured that to me. It just kind of, by being around it, you absorb it. And truly, my adoption itself was arranged really in a part because of that outcome. During, the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the polio epidemic was going around the Dallas area. And another very large family that was also called the Murkison family were good friends of my family. And as that epidemic was spreading further and further, they invited my grandparents to go and stay at their ranch. Well, today that would just seem like part of Dallas. Dallas is easily grown around it. But back then, it seemed like it was in the middle of the countryside, and the pandemic kept going around them. And they said, well, we're going to go to our place in Mexico. And they invited my grandparents to go with them, who did. And while they were there, they fell in love with the people. They absolutely fell in love with the culture, the flavors, everything. And they decided, when we have the means, we are going to build something for our family. And eventually, as Southland Corporation became 7-Eleven and it became profitable, my grandparents did choose a place. And the family jokes because we say, apparently they kept going further out, and my grandmother went further. And my grandfather said, anywhere except for that flat rock up there, because we're not going any further. And of course, my grandmother chose the big flat rock. Well, we know today that was part of a pyramid. And now when you go up there, it was so beautiful. The land was originally dedicated to the corn goddess, Tenochtitlan. And now, because they found that, they were very Catholic, they dedicate to the Virgin Mary. So the whole place is basically like a shrine to the Virgin Mary. And you can't see that unless you stand in the right place. So it obviously was something that a lot of monks and priests enjoyed hanging out in. And my grandparents were very, very social. And at the time, the only people to be social with in the area was a monastery of monks. And one young monk named Father William Wasson in particular hung out with them. And he was such a visionary. He created Our Little Children of the Orphanages World. And he created that at the same time my grandfather was fighting for profit sharing. And the two of them advised each other in that process. And as my grandfather was saying, how do we use a for-profit modality to have an impact? Father William Wasson was saying, how do I use, take those for-profit modalities you have and apply them to a nonprofit and have an impact? So they were kind of each other's advisors, checking in and hanging out with each other, making their plans, and influenced each other greatly. And so as the years went by, my father got to know them. Father William Wasson became very, very close with the family. And fast forward, when my parents decided they wanted to adopt a child, they tried to adopt. They were this close to adopting a pair of African-American twins. But in 1976, in the American South, that was something that people didn't like. And within about a few days of when they were supposed to bring these twins home, they were informed, sorry, you're the wrong race. Now, my mom had an MBA from SMU. She had a nursing degree from SMU. Dad was CEO of 7-Eleven. And so it wasn't something that money could buy. It was just being told you're too old, you're white, you're this, you're that. And my mom could pass for white, although she's 1/4 Native American Blackfoot. But finally they've basically given up, and then they decided they'd call Father William Lawson, who by then his orphanages have spread all over the world. Our little children were in orphanages, and the miracle of it is he would take children in up to the 12th grade level. They give him 3 years of donating time to help raise the other children, and then he got them all into college, and he did this around the world. And he felt key to that was that he did not participate in adoption, because he said if he did, it would make all the other children who were chosen or selected feel bad. But I was born on Mother's Day in 1977 at 7:11 a.m. And Father William Lawson said, this is a sign from God. This child hasn't gotten to know the other kids. They don't even know she exists. It's not going to make them feel bad. He called my mom up on Mother's Day and said, Happy Mother's Day. Well, they were good friends by then. And she said, that's not funny. And she hung up. He called her right back and said, no, I'm not kidding. This child was born at 7:11 a.m. Mother's Day is the year 1977. I think that God has plans for her to be with you. And so for me, the power of that is I know I have done absolutely nothing in my life to deserve walking in on the stage, so to speak, with the privileges inherent in that. And it's given me an opportunity, as I tell people, to live in two different modes of awareness. On one hand, there's the me that's very privileged, brought up in a very powerful family, and all the things that go with that, access to education. As you mentioned earlier, I fought for my life with asthma, migraines, seizures that were very much related, all sorts of different issues. I'm able to speak today because since I was born with the hearing loss and read lips, I couldn't really hear every word that other people say. So my mom and dad would pay people, specialists, put gloves on and shape my tongue. So I say it's like a dancer with choreography, except you learn how to say crown and crayon different, even if you don't hear it differently. All those things were privileges, because if I didn't have access to what my family could provide me, I would not have learned to do any of that. I would be down there making my wares, speaking the way that I hear, and people would assume, sadly, that I was mentally handicapped in some form or fashion. And so when I go down there and I would see a child, up here I was considered a child prodigy. Down there I'd see children just as good as me, if not better, painting pottery and desperately hoping they'd sell it so they could eat that week. And you'd walk by and you'd make eye contact and you go, wow. And so in those moments I thought, if I had not been born at that right moment in time, I'd be that child painting pottery going, please let me eat this week. And what would I be thinking in my head when some rich hoity-toity person walked by? I would be thinking, if I were them, I would do this. And so I go through my life thinking in terms of two people, who I am and all the privileges I've had, but also putting myself in that child, whatever that child might have thought I would do this, then I make sure that I try and live up and do that, because it's a privilege to be here.
Unbelievable. Did you say you were born at 7-11 or did I mishear you?
I'm sorry?
I'm saying, did you say you were born at 7-11?
Yes, 7:11 a.m. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. And you mentioned briefly that your family had fought the KKK.
Yes.
How did that look like?
It didn't happen intentionally, and that's a funny thing. Now I've gone back and I've learned more about my family since then. One of my cousins, Paul Philp, was telling me that apparently my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents that on that side of the family, my grandmother's side of the family, they helped participate in the Underground Railroad. I had not known that for a long time. My father never lectured me about have values. I'd wake up in the morning and, or in the evening, and he'd be reading the Lorax from Dr. Seuss to me. And he'd always say that one line, unless someone likes you, cares a whole awful lot, and nothing's going to be changed. No, it's not. And if you just really look in my eyes and make sure I heard him. But, I didn't realize the where it originated as deeply until I was in about the 6th grade. And my teacher had assigned me to choose one person from my family and interview them and 2 people who had known them. I chose my grandmother. I thought I was just going to be interviewing a socialite. Instead, the first, I was picked up by my Uncle Jody, and there was a place in Dallas called Roses. And if you go down, it's no longer there, but if you go down Greenville Avenue, you went down an alley, and then he pulled in, it looked like this old, abandoned trailer, and you open this gate, and I'm like, where is he taking me? We keep going down into the ground, and there's this tiny, dark little restaurant, and there were two old women, and they made burgers the way they served them, and no other way. You better like it. And he said, I brought you here because I didn't want anyone else to hear this. I really wanted it to be between the two of us. But you are the first in the family that I've shared this story with. And I'm thinking, what in the world? Because it was so dramatic being under the ground in the secret place. And he said, this is what happened. He said back when he was a young boy, his mom would come in, and it would be around, it could be 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. And he would just, and she'd go, get up, it's reading time. And they thought she was nuts. They were deep asleep. Mom, what? And she'd gather them into the back of the house. And at the time, there were 3 boys that my father, his 2 brothers, but then they also had a little sister who sadly died from an ear infection, and 2 young boys who were not quite right mentally. And sadly, that was very normal back then, families having a 50% mortality rate. So each boy would be responsible for getting one of their siblings. They'd all get to the back. They were told to be in their PJs, but with shoes on that they could go outdoors in. And they had to go to the back of the house, and my grandmother would sit there and read them a book. And they're half asleep, and they're thinking, this is insane. Mom's insane. And my uncle Jody said one day, he said, this is enough. I've had enough of this. And he snuck around where she wasn't seeing him and went to the front, because he thought, why is Dad never here? And he went to the front of the house, and he looked out the window, and right there were about 40 people in white cone hats, a big flaming cross. And he saw his father in the front of the house with the, a rifle that he hunted with, behind the door, holding it hidden behind the door with the door open, telling these people to leave, like, get out of here. And he's thinking, what is going on? And he said, one of the most terrifying moments in his life is all these cone hats just turned and looked in the window. And he said that was the first time in his life, first and last, he'd really ever seen his father have real terror on his face. And his father just shoved him down hard on the ground, said, stay down. And after that ordeal, my grandmother apparently came to him and said, I know what you saw. I'm going to ask you not to share this story with anyone in the family until the world has changed, because if you do, they'll have fear, and fear is how people become that, meaning the clan outside. So on time, what started happening, the reason why they were doing all this was because at the time, my grandfather, Joe C. Thompson, was in charge of what was called Negro Day at the State Fair. And that was the one day out of the year that people of color, of any color, Black, brown, Asian, Native American, anyone who wasn't white was allowed to go to the State Fair of Texas. To put things in context, they used to have a Ku Klux Klan Day at the State Fair. I mean, that gives you an idea of the times they were in. It was normal. It was sadly normal to see someone hung. I mean, this was really the era they were living in. And the mob didn't just go after people of color. They would go after white people that spoke up for them. Well, my grandfather was not trying to make a big statement. He just noticed 2 things. One, he noticed that people who are hard workers, at the time, 7-Eleven was still Southland Corporation. The first business was Oak Farms Dairy. And it was, just what it sounds like, making anything out of dairy you could think of. And then as he grew up, it became Southland Ice. Thomas Edison has Southland Energy, and it was considered part of the energy company because ice was our air conditioning back then. And my grandfather had bought that by 10 cents a share out of a jar of pennies and dimes. He had bought that. But anyway, so, he was going out there and saying, who are hard workers? He didn't care what race they were. And he would see people working at the state fair, go, oh, I love his attitude. When you're done with the fair, because the fair was only a short period of time, come over here and work for me. So over time, he ended up with a lot of wonderful employees. One that a lot of people may have heard about, Charles Dawson. He wrote the book Life's So Good, but lived to be 100 and something, and didn't learn how to read until he was about 100. But anyway, he worked with my grandfather. And apparently, and I have not seen this letter, but I've been told by Harry Robinson at the African American Museum that they have it there in Dallas. But apparently, Charles Dawson dictated a letter because he couldn't write and read at the time, that someone wrote down and it was given to my grandfather. And in it, he made the argument. He said, I really appreciate that you're, hiring us. And because my grandfather had started hiring people. And then he had gone and said, after 5 years, 10 years, they became the expert in the company. And so when my father became of age, my grandfather said, I want John, my dad was the eldest, I want you to go apprentice under whoever does whatever job the best. So sometimes that was a white person, sometimes it was a black person or an Asian person or a brown person, whatever. And when they saw a strawberry blonde guy with blue eyes and white skin apprenticing underneath someone of color, it made the Ku Klux Klan very angry. And meanwhile, unbeknownst to all this, my grandfather was just looking at the numbers. He wasn't trying to make a social statement. He just said, look at these numbers. If we integrate the state fair, you're going to triple the amount of money you make every year. And isn't this what we want to do? We want to make money so this chair is self-sustaining. And it was just business to him. But suggesting that they fully integrate the state fair and meanwhile promoting people on the basis of the quality of work as opposed to their race, those two things made the Ku Klux Klan threaten my family's lives. And so sometimes it'd be 20 people, sometimes as many as 60, but they would regularly come out. And I didn't understand all this until my uncle shared it. And the next person I was supposed to interview was a lady who was a socialite. I promised never to say her name, but I went out to the Buccalo Country Club, which my grandfather was one of the co-founders of. And I'm sitting there and her son was a big, big CEO. And I'm only this little, 13, 12-year-old kid. And this woman says, oh my God, you have to promise me you will not share this with your grandmother because I'm not who I was. And I'm thinking, what is she talking about? And she said, we would sit down, play bridge every week and share sandwiches at your grandmother's house. And we would find out her schedule and come back and tell our husbands, and they would know exactly when to go light the cross and terrorize your family. And I'm looking over and I see this man, and he's just pulling away, his whole body language, just looking horrified and appalled. And she starts breaking down crying. She said, please forgive me. And I look at her, and again, I'm just this kid. And I said, well, I can see by the body language of your son, this is the first time he's hearing this, but you must have done change somewhere along the line because he looks appalled. If you were the same person, he would not be looking appalled. So something changed in you. Based on that, I can at least speak for myself that I'm forgiven. I forgive you. And she's thanked me for that. But all of that, was put into my little 6th grade report. And I came back home and I was, used to, reading, my reports to my father before I'd go to school and give them. And that day he got down on his knees and looked me in the eye to eye. And he said, I want to thank you for reminding me what my real job on this earth is. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I've been having the same position that my father used to hold as being head of the Texas State Fair. And I'm very Catholic. And there is a gay pride march trying to occur on the grounds. And I've been torn because people are like, of course you can't let them march. And he said, but something is just not letting me. And he said, I realize now, if I deny any demographic of people's right to march for their human rights and their civil rights, it would be like spitting in my parents' eyes. And I later found out he marched with them. So, I got to grow up and seeing this. And one of my responsibilities at home was to write down the voicemails that people would leave on the answering machines. Remember those things? And my father used to write a list, and it was how I learned all the 4-letter words. And the reason why he wrote them down is at one point, because I would get these things that would say, and I won't try and cuss on your show, but it was like, you son of a such and such, you're going to effing hell in the name of Jesus Christ. We're going to kill you, kill your kid. I mean, people were violent. They would threaten my mom. They threatened me because my dad was allowing this march. And because my parents had me taking the voicemails, I got to hear that. And my father would just say, you don't have to write those down. But by not trying to sequester me from it, it also taught me at an early age, what does it take to be willing to stand up for the right thing? But having now known that story in my family, I could understand if my grandparents were willing to risk their lives, who are we to, cowtail because some stupid people left something on the voicemail? And, moving forward now, in the Memnosyne Institute, just years and years. And, and I like to share this because sometimes people feel like society isn't progressing enough. And I always try and share this, but we had a wonderful man by the name of Ken. And Ken Campbell was in charge of our interfaith, intercultural outreach and interracial. And it often was over different economic strata. And it was just volunteers. And they would volunteer to do different things all around the country at the city. And finally, one day, I was taking him out to thank him for doing such a good job. And we're sitting across from a place here in Dallas called Fuse, and it's a pun because it's an old electric building. And I told him how my father used to carry these huge blocks of ice plant on his back, and he had to go up 40 some floors because as a Catholic, they wouldn't allow him to use the elevator. He had to take it up the stairs each floor. And, when I was explaining that to him, he said, wait a minute, tell me more about your family. And so I told him about how my family had fought the Ku Klux Klan and all that. And he went, wait a minute. He said, when was this? And he had just inherited a trunk, and it was the Grand Dragon Wizard, whatever you call it, the red robes, red cone hat, everything. And he went, it was my grandfather who was terrorizing your family. And we just stared at each other. And then he went, you won. I'm in charge of your interracial, interfaith outreach program, and I love it. And that to me is where you get hope, because at the end of the day, we can always feel like we're not progressing enough. But when I look at the generations that came before me, whether it was the Underground Railroad, whether it was fighting the Ku Klux Klan, whether it was my father, ignoring the people that threatened his life to march in the LGBT Pride March, all these different things, it gave me a demonstration of legacy to live up to. So that's, when I share that. And also when people talk about conscious capitalism and social responsible investing, it's important to recognize the role companies can play in that trajectory. And my family is a good example of that.
And an innocent question, where was the police in those times? If people came to your house or left you messages, you couldn't call the police and tell them and have them help you? Or that's nobody to talk to?
People don't bother with, also what eras are you talking about? Back in the early 90s, you report harassment because you're standing up for LGBT stuff. People wouldn't care about that. It's just, part of it also is understanding the American South. We've progressed greatly. Back in high school, I dated, white guys from time to time. And if I was walking hand in hand at North Park, we got spit on by both races. So, people have progressed. Now I see interracial families everywhere. I see them on TV. It's just being aware of where we are in history, and that we really stand on the shoulders of people before us that made those freedoms and, society's comfort level with it possible. And it also makes you aware of your role.
That's the background that basically drove you to do what you do today as a humanitarian. And I guess that you went to university, you met your husband, I believe. What did you study?
What did I study? In the beginning, I was studying criminal abnormal psychology. And then I moved on to, and I always was also pursuing fine art. And then I moved on to I actually got a business degree with emphasis on organizational psychology. So as I joke with people, sociologists say it's the society's fault, psychologists, it's your fault. Organizational psychology, you kind of say it's a combination.
And so how did your humanitarian work started? I remember you told me that you brought two tribes that's been fighting forever to work together. Was that your beginning?
Well, that came out of two things. One, being young, and too young to think that anyone would say no. And that began, I brought 45 spiritual leaders from around the world together, and Joshua made a documentary over it called Many Paths, One Source. And it was Western, Eastern, Indigenous, and New Age spiritual leaders. And we challenged them to come up with 10 essential truths, meaning regardless of what you believe, these are things that any human being could make their world better just by adhering or believing in or understanding. And the process of getting to that point was a big week-long process. A lot of people being hurt, tears, accusations, healing. I mean, it truly was a lot. And after, to put it in perspective, we had a lady by name Winnie. She was Tlingit from Alaska, and she had called me a week before. And to make that phone call, she lived in an Eskimo in the middle of nowhere. She had to wait until the right dog sled came by, take 2 different dog sleds to 2 different cities. And third city, she got a truck, and that drove her into the main city where she could make a phone call. And she was explaining to me, I want to come down there. I'm going to celebrate my 80th birthday by participating, but I'm worried because it's called the Bible Belt. And up here in Alaska, I get people every so many weeks that come here and they have a Bible and they literally beat me until I'm bleeding in the snow unless I accept the word of Jesus Christ. And she said, I hear about Bible beaters. Well, they beat me. And I realized she's not being funny. She's being real. And I said, well, I won't let anyone beat you, I promise. And when she came down, we had a friend of ours who now works with us, Reverend Todd Collier. And I was trying to call around to find anyone regionally who was participating to join us since she came in early for dinner. And he was able to come. And in the beginning, she was at the far end, kind of terrified of him. But he brought his 2 kids and they used him like the human jungle gym. And it's hard to look intimidating when you have kids crawling all over you. And by the end of that, she was sitting next to him, joking with him with his kids, and she got to let go of her fear. And I share that little story because it was that times 45 people, all of their own backgrounds. And 2 of the tribes that came were the Hopi and Navajo. And as we were doing the editing and that whole process at about 2:30 a.m. in the morning, and I call it a God moment because we couldn't have planned this. Tony Estrada, who was our producer, was walking through the door and I opened the door and both of our cell phones ring. And he's hearing from the leaders of the Navajo tribe. He was Navajo. I'm hearing from the Hopi tribe. And they both tell us this woman and these men came by today and they said that they have to slurry coal through our water in some way or another, but they can do it through our tribe or they can do it the other tribe. One tribe's water is going to get poisoned and they just really like ours the best. So if we sign the dotted line, they'll only poison the other side. Well, both of us are hearing, this from these different tribal leaders. And so we immediately said, don't sign anything. And we tell them what we're hearing. And I said, look, I will go out and get John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And if I send that book to all of you, if I hear from you in 2 to 3 days that you want to get together, I'll make it happen. And, they said, there's no way. We haven't gotten along for 300 years. We don't want to get along. Well, within about 3 days, I had heard from all of them and they wanted to meet. And that in itself was historic. And we walk in there in that morning and the tensions were so high because some teenage Navajos had beat up some Hopi elders, like literally the day before. So everybody was really high. A lady came in and I hadn't thought about, the bottled water. One was fizzy and she picked it up and spat out like, you're trying to poison me. And I had to explain to her, no, it's just fizzy water. That was the tensions. And we went in and I brought out a chess set and I said, here are the facts. The companies, they were Peabody, Sith, and Blackstone, I said, that are trying to do all this to you. They are operating like one chess side of the chessboard. You're insisting on fighting like individual pawns. You're going to lose. The only way you have a hope and protecting your water and all this is to work together. And it took a long time. And finally, I had to put my family corporate hat on and say, look, thank God I was raised in a family that has ethics, but I'll speak to you in the way that I understand, because my father also taught me, understand how some very immoral people will act and expect it so you can strategize and deal with it. And I say, if I had no morals and I was just a sociopath, I would come out here and I would get I would come out and argue that to own the DNA, like literally get a patent on the DNA of the blue corn that all of you rely on. And then I'd make it illegal for you to grow it. And they were like, how could you think of something so immoral, so evil? I said, sadly, easily. I can come up with 3 things right now that are absolutely evil. And so I came up and I demonstrated, and they went, how can we protect ourselves from this? I said, first of all, you have to work together. And in the process of doing all that, it felt bad because on one hand, you're ripping a certain innocence away. On the other hand, it was necessary to get them to do what they need to do. And we negotiated the first treaty in 300 years between Hopi and Navajo tribes. And till today, we are the third party that gets to hold a copy of that. And we get phone calls every now and then when they need clarification on what was intended or agreed on. So it's a privilege.
And you took the corporate hat as well to not invest in companies like some of the names you mentioned that you think are not ethical.
I mean, I would not, I would never, when I was doing that, I was so proud that we had negotiated that treaty. And then I came home and I finished my business degree and I could really read my trust documents for the first time. And it was a shock because I had held babies, I had hung out with elders that they thought they were dying from cancer, and it was arsenic poisoning. And so I realized, and a lot of people may not understand, if you think of a donut, the Hopi are the donut hole, the Navajo are the donut geographically. So you can't move water one way without affecting the other tribe. I mean, that's impossible. And we learned the history. Like, some of these companies had been planning for this since the 1800s. And that was a real wake-up call for me, because it helped me understand just how much foresight some very evil people are, like have, and that they would be willing to plan knowing they wouldn't even financially benefit. That, like, it would be 3 or 4 generations down the line that would benefit from something, well, just outright evil they put in motion. And so it was what we were trying to do is educate these tribes to think in terms of, you got to strategize long term, because that's what outside interests are doing.
And then tell us about your organization that you founded. When was it founded? What was the idea behind
The
it?
Memnosyne Institute, yes. With the Memnosyne Institute, that we actually did that first event without even having our 501c3. And we really got our 501c3 doing the same process as we were negotiating the treaty. So we kind of came out running out the gate, and hadn't even fully designed programs before we were negotiating that treaty.
How old were you back then? You were?
I was in my early 20s. Yeah, in my early 20s. Yeah, and that's why I joke. I was too young to even think for one moment something was impossible, and there's power in that. There's a lot of power in just saying, why not? And it's something I hope I never lose, because what's the worst that can happen? You fail, well, at least you tried. I can't tell you how many things that we have been able to accomplish that have been historic because we were audacious enough to go for it. But with the idea of the Memnosyne Institute, it began because when I was back in high school, I was sitting on my bed. My dad came in, he threw Thomas Friedman's book, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, on the bed. And he said, every child, and I was class of 96, he said, every child and your age and younger needs to read this book, because this is going to be the world you're inheriting. So it really got my attention, and I read the book and I was fascinated. And it was my introduction to globalization and understanding how the world we were inheriting was going to be so interdependent on each other. And, and how, and people were talking about it economically, but people were not talking about it sociologically. And that was what fascinated me, because I'm thinking, if we are people on different sides of the globe trying to figure out how we're working with this limited resource called Earth, and we are not paying attention to our different values and our different perspectives, this could be a major problem for humanity, because the only people I hear talking about globalization are those in finance. And I grew up seeing that constantly. And at the same time, I was having literally a dream of a campus where they had a place for science, a place for medicine, a place for arts, a place for, go down the list. And I was taken later in my early 20s to a place called Xochicalco, located outside of Cuernavaca, Mexico. And it's a campus, and it's got a place for each of those areas of knowledge. It was an ancient university. They had running water. They had things like, if you made the pin camera when you were a kid, where you can get a photograph. It's the same optics, but a huge cave with light that would be condensed enough that when you put your hand under it, you can see bones. So it's like an X-ray. And that was the technology that had been so advanced back then. I mean, the water that they got that was running, that still runs today, came from way down below the mountain. So they had pumping going up. But one of the key things was that this was a place that Native Americans all over the continent, as all the way down to South America, the butterfly was the symbol. And if you wore this, it didn't matter if your tribes were warring, it was understood you were going for the benefit of humanity. So they would feed you, clothe you, help you get there. And when I stood there, I realized this vision I had of a place with different areas of knowledge where humanity could share its knowledge for the purpose of helping our species to evolve had existed. Not only existed, but half the world, literally all the Americans, had done this and collaborated before. And I would tell my father, and he'd say, well, now you've seen proof it could be done. And if you're going to be able to do it, you will achieve it by the time you're 30. And he kept saying that to me. And he kept saying it in my 20s. And as I kept moving forward, when he passed away, it was still in my head. And, I just kept pushing and pushing. And that vision, now we have campuses, 2 campuses in Mexico. We have a chapter in Japan, chapter Israel, Palestine, of course, a chapter in Mexico. And here in the United States, we have centers within our organization for each of those areas of knowledge. And it's taken us from having the #1 initiative fighting food waste in the country, Food Source DFW, which came out of the interfaith initiatives that we have. It's fed people from, all the way from up in New York down to Puerto Rico, California, Atlanta, all sorts of groups fighting food waste, and that took us to working with corporations. But then we have Green Source DFW, which united the North Texas, which is an area larger than half of France. We were able to get that area to unite in terms of people saying, I'm a scientist, I'm an inventor, I'm an activist, and they all saw themselves as the definition of the green community. We actually got them to realize they're spokes on the same wheel, that they actually need to work together. So, a lot of our programs started coming out of how do you address globalization and what kind of conversations do you have to make to empower these things to happen? So that's how the trajectory came about.
And you do an amazing job there. And you basically, are you getting any support, any financial support for that, or you guys support it all from your own money?
Well, right now I'm 44 years old. So I've been doing this for about, it's weird to think, I've been doing this for about 20 years, and it's largely been carried by my husband and me financially. We have been blessed to have donations, and then there are different types of donations, like with Food Source DFW, 100% of the food is donated. That was an initiative in which, basically it was applying for-profit modalities to a nonprofit issue. We spent 3 years doing research. And it came out because we had interfaith people that would go and they'd serve communities. And then they came to us and said, we're getting frustrated. We're serving the same people. The numbers aren't going down. So we're wanting to keep doing it, but we want to do something to help the numbers in need go down. And when we researched deeper, we found out that 30% of the food being donated ended up in a landfill. And we found out 30% of the homeless and hungry were not getting fed. So you do the math, there's some correlation here. And what we found out is, after doing the research, is that the gap was in where the donors are being able to bring the food. So we heard stories like 3 pallets. Those are you see a big truck down the highway, that's a pallet. So 3 huge pallets of yogurt were donated to one nonprofit that didn't have refrigeration capability. By the time they found another nonprofit that did, it had all been spoiled. And so you kept hearing these stories. We learned a lot of things like grocery stores will not put a banana on the shelves if it's not curved enough. If someone's hungry, they don't care if it's a straight banana. So we learned a whole lot of things that we hadn't known before. And we were able to go and work directly with the companies. He said, look, if they have certain rules, like technically like yogurt, if it's past a certain moment in time, they can't put it on the shelves. But there's still a moment in time where it's still completely edible if you can get it in that moment. And so what we started realizing is, if we went to every nonprofit and every homeless shelter and negotiated and said, when someone calls you, call us. And it means that you won't get that immediate 100% of what someone is about to donate you in that moment. But by the end of the year, you could triple what you receive for your operation. And that took about 3 years for people to really come around. And all I can tell you is that now everybody that's participating in it is very glad they have, because they truly have even quadrupled the amount of food they've received. And then the companies are happy, like Produce, these different groups that have come in. They only have to call us. They don't have to worry about it, because it's money. It's money when a truck has to make more than one stop. They budget for that one stop. So if they can make a donation of that huge amount of food in one stop, then you can get a great deal more donated to everybody else. So it was really a matter of distribution, which is something that usually a for-profit would take a look at. So a lot of the things that we do now, we take a look at things from both a for-profit and nonprofit angle, even though we're a nonprofit, to say, how do we make things work? Because I truly believe at the end of the day, people are good. So if you can facilitate and make it easy for them, they will. And now we get literally millions, without exaggeration, millions of dollars worth of produce every year. And, so those are some of the significant donations that we're also receiving.
Amazing. And now you recently started UTF Holdings.
Yes.
So can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm starting it off with my friend Tanya Aurelius Rodriguez and Kalu Ngorma. Kalu is amazing. He's someone that I got to meet through Nexus, which is an organization of young wealth holders. And I participated through my 20s and 30s, and now I'm a mentor and advisor. And the whole point of it was trying to help younger people recognize in the past, our pattern of behavior is usually your 20s, you're all about you, your 30s, you fall in love, maybe it's you and your partner, maybe you start having kids. By your 40s, people go, oh, there's another part of the world outside of me and mine that I should care about. But right now we're in a situation in the world where we don't have that time. And we have to immediately start caring and being aware of our impact when we're out the gate of college in our 20s, because literally we are running out of the time to address all the different world's problems. And so they were trying to get people to be aware of how they're operating, especially those of us that are inheriting, because it's like inheriting a business when you're blessed to inherit a certain amount of wealth. And if you can be aware of it the way like my grandfather was, you're not necessarily losing money, but you're aware of how your choices can shape society and have that impact. And Kalu was someone that joined me in that organization because it had subgroups. Not everybody was participating, but we participated in what's called a working group. And it has to be allowed by the United Nations. You can't just say you're a working group. And we were approved, and we focused on Indigenous issues all around the world. So not just Native American, but Indigenous in Africa, Indigenous in Australia, Indigenous in New Zealand, et cetera. And I was chair of that for a long time. And Kalu had done a great deal in Africa. His family's from a royal family in Africa. And he had created on Wall Street just under $1 billion fund to help in startup companies in Africa. And so he was someone that really walked his own talk. And meanwhile, my other friend, Tanya Aurelius Rodriguez, she's recently been recognized by the federal government of Mexico as being the leading eco-architect in the country. She's developed things out there in the Yucatan that people haven't done before. They were just cutting the rainforest down, putting a slab of concrete up, putting up their hotel, and it was destroying things. Toucans, if you don't know what that is, think of Fruit Loops. It's like the Fruit Looper. They were disappearing, and she basically designed her architecture to go around certain trees, maintaining them, protecting them. There's something called the Maya Road, which basically the ancient Maya would put chalk on so they would reflect the moon. They could make their way and find their way at night. Instead of destroying the part of it that was on her property, she took inspiration from when she visited our cultural center in the Shinto and said, let's maintain this. And so her property has all this beautiful history. It's maintained, and species have come back because she's done it so right. Now she's also considered she's an advisor for all development in the Yucatan, doing an incredible job. And after realizing together, Kalu's had, X number of years on Wall Street doing what he did. She's had decades now doing what she's done, and I've had decades doing what I've done the humanitarian way. We realized if the three of us got together, we could have a major impact. And so UTF Holdings is social responsible investing and conscious capitalism. The difference being, one, you're putting money in other projects. One, you're putting it in something you've designed. We're doing both. And one of our conscious capitalism projects is ECO, staying for ecological, economical. And so we have land development arm, that's doing that. And then UTF Holdings is where we've created different funds and that we're putting things in. And I'm very blessed in that, thanks to Caden Spank and Robertson Wealth, I have an opportunity where if I put money into something just for this year, my trust will agree to match that. So if we find a really amazing project and someone is willing to put money and donate, not donate, but invest it through UTF Holdings, I can match that and really double it. And what I'm excited about that is over the years in SRIs, people usually come to me to do 100%, they're starting off. And what we're looking at is we're trying to find companies that have been around for maybe even a few decades, but they've just been done ethically. And they should be labeled as SRIs, because B Corps, while it's a new slang term, a lot of people don't realize that it may not be fully legally recognized in your country, but basically it legally gives the same rights to the planet and to people, to humanity, as you do your shareholders. Because in the past, like if my dad wanted to argue to do the right thing and admit the shareholders lost money, on Victor Lebeau ethics, he was doing the wrong thing. But now if you put that into your bylaws as a corporation, it makes it easier for the ethical CEO to say, yes, we're not going to make as much. We're still going to make a sizable profit, but we're not going to hurt people if we do choice B instead of choice A. And this gives him something to stand on. But a lot of companies have been doing it this way for a long time and just haven't gone and registered themselves as a B Corp and haven't done all that legwork. And if we do the research, we can support a lot of those companies and bring them into the dialogue and recognition of what an SRI is.
And now you're going to really work on that and allow more people to actually join you, invest in.
Well, yes, a lot of the individual funds, we have different groups supporting different demographics, women-owned businesses, Latino businesses. We've combined African-American with Black European, with African into one fund. So we have funds that are spelled out in terms of racial demographics, gender demographics. We have an LGBT fund, but two of the ones I'm very excited about because I haven't heard anyone else doing them is, doing the work that I do. I have gotten to meet with white supremacists and other groups, and I've learned to walk in and not be antagonistic. Instead, why do you feel like you do? And what I usually say is, have you ever heard of a skinhead scholarship fund? Have you ever heard of a Ku Klux Klan small business fund? And they'll say no. And then I say, well, what can be done to help you? What are your concerns? And what I found is what attracts people to the extremes is they feel unheard. They feel like they have not been seen. And in my country, there is a fallacy. Yes, being someone of color, I could say you definitely have a privilege of being white, but the downside of that is that people aren't recognizing that, or at least they're not speaking about that not every white person comes from a great deal of wealth and power. There are many poor areas, and because of their race, they can't qualify for certain scholarships. And as someone who is an independent and largely progressive, people can get angry at me for acknowledging that. But I went to a school where I did my SATs and I missed 2 questions, and I had two friends that were identical twins, and they didn't miss a single question on their SAT. And because I marked brown, they marked white, I got 12 scholarship offers. They didn't get any. And here they were, they had, holes in their shoes. And, here I was living in this mansion, and it wasn't fair. And so I grew up seeing what the face of that could be, going with a friend after she spent the night at my house to another person's house, and her whole family was living in basically one big room. She ended up going, and I sadly haven't heard from her after she fought in Afghanistan. But, these are things that, and she did that in order to pay for her way. So my friend may have died because the only way to get to college was to serve. I got to see these examples. And what I realized is if we're going to heal as a nation, we have to take the marching in the streets into Wall Street. And what I mean by that is we have to actually have the empathy. Then empathy doesn't mean agreement, but it means we have to have the empathy to say, let me see out of your eyes. And if I can see out of your eyes, how can I help you? What would I be feeling? And so we realized if we did a fund that was helping struggling Caucasian areas, we had a number of minorities that, like us, were saying, what, we want to heal. And if we can start investing in some of those communities, action speaks louder than words. Let's see if we can help them improve their lives. And it's really a seed toward healing. The other fund that we're looking at that, really excites me is what I call basically an environmental recovery fund. And that's because climate change is occurring. Here in Texas, we see the results by having more tornadoes. Louisiana, they have the results for having more hurricanes. The scientists in our area say, yes, it's increasing because of climate change. And that's a debate people can go on and on about. But the facts are it does occur. So like last year, we had the Texas freeze, which was related to climate change. And we had a poor farmer who had chickens, and this guy made a lot of money originally because, all the 5-star restaurants, 5-star hotels in the area, they bought his chickens. And the freeze just, broke a pipe. The pipe flooded. It made all the chickens get soaked. They froze to death. So he just needed money for new chickens and to repair the pipe. And unfortunately, every time he went to a bank, they wanted to basically rob him and steal his business from him that he had spent decades building. And if you're not greedy, what a great opportunity. He has a guaranteed pipeline to making money, and the man just needs this amount to recover from an incident that climate change has caused. And we realized when we were looking at that example that those are situations we're going to unfortunately be seeing all around the world as people deal with the ramifications of climate change. So and these can be very conservative investments, but they help lives. And it's dealing with a real factor. And I haven't heard anyone doing something to focus on that. So those are some of the things that we're very excited about. And of course, with the eco arm, we're doing a lot of things in terms of development that's all environmentally responsible. And at the same time, trying to bring some of those modalities into affordable ways in areas that might not otherwise be able to afford them.
And I'm looking at more areas where you're active. We don't really have time because we basically reached an hour, which I expected. I told you we probably need 2 sessions to cover all you do. But I would just say this, in between all this work you do, you have time to write articles that some of them are considered very, very serious pieces of journalism, and you won awards on that. And do art, then and also there you are very successful and you won awards for your art. So you find the time to do that as well.
Well, with I think that if you are taking in all this information, and when I spend time and sit with you and hear about your experiences, that's information. And I mean, as you and I have experienced the depth at which we can go in a dialogue, that kind of information. I'm experiencing that when I'm spending time with the Maori in New Zealand, when I've gone to Rwanda, some experiences like in Rwanda where you're hiding from someone who participated in the genocide, he's walking by with a machete and you're hiding under a table, but he doesn't see you. All of this stuff becomes information. And if I don't have some way to respond to that and to process that, it would be quite overwhelming. So a lot of, when it comes to my art, I call myself being a scribe because I'm taking in information. And I didn't intentionally cultivate this, but I'm very blessed to know a whole lot of rabbis, a whole lot of imams, ministers, priests, different indigenous spiritual leaders, new age leaders. I don't know why. I seem to have been blessed to know a whole lot of spiritual leaders and religious leaders from around the world. And spending time with any of them, like real time in their houses for weeks on end, or it's a privilege. It's a real privilege. And the more I spend time with them, they're experts in their area. But most of them to do that, they haven't been able to really spend a whole lot of time with people in their same kind of position from a different spiritual path. And that's where I found a very unique niche, because I've been blessed to spend such significant, deep time with people that are scholars of their tradition, and not just scholars, but working spiritual leaders that are counseling people, helping people, and witnessing that, and sometimes volunteering with what they're doing. It allowed me to get an insight into the commonalities between human experiences. Because while the religions and spiritual traditions may be very different, at the core, the desire and need and what they provide is a universal human thing. And when I sculpt, I end up exploring what are those universal commonalities. And from that side, I go into a very deep metaphysical exploration. Whereas on, when it comes to my writing, it's a lot more, I guess you could say, academic, a lot more social. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So first of all, I'm looking forward to see you at our conferences in person outside of Texas as well. So I hope we'll see you this year at some of the destinations in the US, Canada, London, because I think you were doing a fabulous job at Houston and Dallas when you spoke at our event. And I would love for us to do another session and dive more into details, because I think we really covered just a little bit of your world and your brave fight for social justice that I'm sure is not easy. And I'm sure you have many people that are not very happy about what you do, whether it's extremist whether it's corporates that don't like the fact you're abandoning your stocks just because this or that. So I'm sure you have your share of dealing with those responses as well. So I would love to talk to you some more. And we'll probably schedule another session. So anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here, Denny. And what I'd like to share with anyone is that the most powerful things that we've been able to accomplish have been due to collaborations. And, so I am very open. I really am a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. If someone else has been doing something 15 years, they're going to do it better. I'm a big believer in being humble. When you go to a third world country, as I tell people, I meet some of the smartest, most intelligent people, because if they're not smart, they're not surviving. So, if you can work with humility enough to learn, to recognize you're getting and learning as much from wherever you're working as much as you're giving, you're not the person coming from on high with the answers. And if you're willing to collaborate with your organization, both nonprofit and for-profit, I am very open to collaborating. Again, we've done projects all over the world. I participate in things from Malaysia to New Zealand, Japan, to Africa, throughout Latin America. We have a Masks for Life campaign right now where we're still getting KN95 masks to Native American communities throughout the Americas. Sadly, the further south you go, there's more they still need them. We're going to hopefully do something, I hope with you, in London, coming up in the fall. So there's so many different things that we are happy to collaborate on. And if you have something that you think might be a good fit, please contact me. I would love to find out how we can basically magnify our work together.
Sounds amazing. So Mary, thank you so much, Marianne, for being with us today. And I'm looking forward to the next time that we'll be seeing each other, which will not be too long, too far ahead. We'll talk about that and let everybody know the next time you will speak at our event. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
I will see you soon.
Appreciate it.
And send warm regards to Joshua and everybody, your lovely team, and everybody that helped us coordinate this and our dinner. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.